Hello, hello, and welcome to an evening with Rhonda Magee. This is the fifth annual empowerment retreat, perhaps our last virtual retreat, as Rhonda's with us here in London at Birkbeck College, hosting the sixth annual empowerment retreat. So much joy, which is really much needed in the world right now. Um, so much energy already on day one of 9 of this lovely event. I mean, we started off this morning with just such an unexpected generosity of love and prayer and devotion, and I'm just absolutely over the moon with with what happened this morning. And here we are with Rhonda Magee, author of The Inner Work
Yeah, here I have
of
my
Racial Justice.
workbook version of it.
Yeah, yours looks a little bit more worn than mine, but I can understand that.
Right.
Um, there's so much to say about Rhonda, and I, I guess more than anything, she's our patron, a friend, a law professor, um, and recently a Buddhist, on the authority on Buddhist, and there's so much I can say, but I'm just delighted that you're here and you're with us. And I think sometimes things don't need to be said, but actually really felt. And I think what actually matters is you here with us and this moment. Um, and we all love you. Over to you, Rhonda.
Thank you, my dear brother. Really receiving that beautiful welcome and introduction straight from your heart to ours, my dear William. I'm coming to you from the United States, from actually the state of North Carolina, where my mother and my sister live and where I was born. I'm normally living, as many of you know, in California, in San Francisco, but I'm here with you from the southern part of the United States, where my roots are. And that feels auspicious and important. So I have so much I want to say about this moment and about the incredible opportunity created by this international Sangha and this invitation to come together for this empowerment retreat, this 5th annual, right? It just, first of all, it makes me smile to say that. And really, the theme of my reflections really will invite us into really looking at this moment that we're in and seeing what about the moment that we're in is really speaking to your heart right now in a way that might support each of you, each of us, separately and together, in discerning really how best to maximize the possibility of healing and beyond healing, of really bringing forth our highest and best image or vision, if you will, dream, for what these next few years in the middle of forever might look like for us. I am really leaning in this moment on the metaphor of the dream, of a dream, of the dream, of us as dreamers who make things real in the world, for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is just, I think, having a clear sense of the possibilities of an imagination, right? And in the midst of circumstances that seem kind of, from the perspective of our particular purchase on quote unquote reality. And y'all know what I mean by our particular purchase. Everybody's living a different reality. The things that we're privileged to see, invited to see, placed in positions to see, differ so radically. And that's always been so, and it will always be so. And yet, I think, in this particular moment, it's especially up for us the challenge of coming together and accessing a sense of common ground and common humanity in the midst of so much rich and radical differentiation in terms of positionality, power, resources, vulnerability, privilege, experience of oppression. Finding a way into a common conversation is not always easy. So as we gather here in this session, I want to, at the outset, invite us sort of into this preliminary practice of being conscious of this being an opportunity for us to cultivate, practice, arriving with intention and accessing our power to shape the moment and the experience that we're in. So on this theme of, in a way, you could say the theme is imagining a world. I'm looking at a sort of a sermon, kind of a reflection on a Martin Luther King Jr. sermon that I wrote, and it was a reflection on one sermon in the collection that King wrote called Strength to Love, which really was, I think, the only formal collection of formal sermons that Martin Luther King Jr. ever really published. He so much believed in the power of presence-based communication to speak the word that needed to be spoken. That he kind of resisted having his sermons published, but he relented after some time, and I think we're all the better off for it, because he produced, there is this beautiful collection called Strength to Love, some of you may have seen. And in one of the chapters, he talks about the importance of cultivating both a tough mind and a tender heart. And so, Strength to Love was sort of published after he had given the famous I Have a Dream speech and really been in the storm for a long time, trying to bring about a spiritually grounded transformation in the United States that might reverberate in a time of war, the Vietnam War, in a time of economic change, in a time of increasing economic instability because of the rise then of late stage capitalism, where it was then. So, and of course, in a time of racism and other isms and schisms. So, I think when we point toward the invocation of a dream in the midst of challenging circumstances, to me, Martin Luther King Jr. is just one of many inspirational teachers. He's one that maybe we rely on too much, but in the case of this invitation that I got to reflect on that particular sermon, I was reminded of some of the subtler points of his genius, that we often don't get a chance to reflect on together. And so it is, mindful of the risk of leaning too much on that one giant of 20th century inspiration for living a spiritual activism. I will rely somewhat on these recent reflections on this one, again, under, not as well known sermon of his, in which he was specifically talking about how to stay in the storm, how to do the particular thing that he described it, keeping a mind sort of tough or clear, strong, fierce, but always having a tender heart. And to me, frankly, that's one way of thinking about what Buddhist practice has availed for me, So I'll certainly want to say a little bit more about, my own journey around balancing tough mind, tender heart, and how Buddhism has helped. But before we go too far into that, as I mentioned, I want to invite us to lean into our practices and make manifest how it is that we might more and more from this commitment that each of you all have, or else you wouldn't be here, to live more deeply in alignment with practices. Each of us may have different practices. I lean very clearly into Buddhism and into the values and ethics of non-harming, non-violence that I see as underlying this great way that we've inherited from teachers who've lovingly translated the teachings of the Buddha, Asian heritage, Asian American, in my case, teachers who so lovingly and generously have paved a way for my own entry into that great lineage. But each of us are drawing on different lineages. I'll say that in addition to Buddhism, especially because I'm in North Carolina, place of my birth, state of my birth anyway, I'm not quite in the city of it. I also draw on Christianity and a certain kind of robust, can't keep it down gospel. The very robust, can't keep it down, make a way out of no way kind of gospel, interpreting traditional spirituals with a kind of a sense of like, child, let me tell you, that led to what what some people call the sort of hard gospel, that led to the blues, or was interpreted through or shot through with the blues, that led to R&B, rock and roll, and so many other sort of aspects of what has provided a certain other kind of spiritual support for so many of us as a background soundtrack to our lives. That there's some integration between Southern kind of roots Christianity in the context of white supremacist oppression and the legacies of slavery and enslavement in our lives, that led to a certain kind of music, a certain quality that began to be called soul and soulfulness in the early 1970s, late 1960s, mid to late 1960s and 70s. And so, I want to say that part of what I want to offer, in addition to leaning on these reflections on this particular sermon from Martin Luther King Jr., Tough Mind and Tender Heart, I want to just offer a taste of some of what I've been offering around this theme of integrating soulfulness, or these qualities that I'm pointing to that come from my own roots here, into what we call mindfulness. Because fortunately, I do think, and the particular way that I interpret and live out the teachings of the Buddha, fortunately, I've received these teachings as an invitation to apply them in ways that speak to the times that we all live in, and the experiences that we have, and the cultural location that we find ourselves in. So there's nothing static about the teachings of Buddhism or the teachings of the historical Buddha to me. So while we owe this great legacy of respect and appreciation to the heritages and cultures, from which these teachings emerge, from, the Buddha's early location in India, and the many different places across the Asian diaspora which took up those teachings, interpreted them in myriad ways, to now some 2,500 years later, which is a miracle in and of itself, being able to really commit to practice and study of those teachings and their allied disciplines, the teachings and the representation, the model, the embodiment of the Buddha, and as a human being who walked the earth, seeking to apply those teachings in daily life. The discipline of Sangha, right? So to me, the discipline of bearing witness to the Buddha as a historical figure who sought to apply teachings, practices, and the insights derived from being in a teaching and practice community, Sangha, right? Those are part of what animate me, for sure, this commitment to a particular interpretation and lived engagement with Buddhism. I'm wearing my rakusu, right, which is I'm wearing the fancy version of one that I sewed myself to represent taking on, lay vows, the vows associated with being a lay teacher of Buddhism, practitioner and teacher. And now this level that I've agreed to accept from my teacher and preceptor, Roshi Joan Halifax of the Upaya Zen Center, in the peacemaker tradition of Buddhism, a very lively, socially engaged tradition, is at the level that I'm, have accepted now. It really invites me into a kind of a further step along the path of development to enable me to teach even more. But for now, it's really supporting, recognizing progress after a set of commitments and engagements, and opening the door to me serving more as a spiritual guide for others on the path. So everything that I'm saying is in the spirit of just a gentle offering from what I've been exploring as I've sought to deepen my own commitment as a lifelong student of the teachings of the Buddha, integrating them more fully in this way that I feel called to do, with the lens that I've been gifted with by being born on this soil and, coming through the heritage of African Americanism, and really applying all of those things to the particular challenges that we're living in right now. And so there is this quality of African American spiritualism that I've pointed to that's rooted in a Christianity that's really about a prophetic, we will overcome, we shall overcome these circumstances. So that the particular interpretation that I bring alive, that comes alive in my heart, interpretation of the Buddhist teachings, is grounded in the soil of North Carolina, the particular heritage of Black people here, the kind of Christianity that helped get us through. But the fact that I, in my own lifetime, have found this particular clearing in Buddhist teachings as well. So it's sort of all here in its own little particular manifestation. And I invite all of us to claim all of the different threads that run through each of us as we think about how to enact our dream, the moral dream for a better world that is coming alive in our hearts right now. What does it mean for us to be dreamers at this time? And how do our deepening spiritual commitments, practices, experiences support us in taking time to imagine a world, and pausing long enough with what comes up to really allow the vision, the image, the imagination to guide us, to be trusted, to be a friend to us when we struggle. So just pausing and wondering if you're willing to, in the spirit of, again, enacting this community here, share, well, before we share, just pause and allow ourselves to come home to our bodies. As I've been speaking those words, certainly some images have been coming to mind for you. Some aspects of your own experience have been coming up. If we think about the particular spiritual commitments and practices that you're bringing into this circle, and imagine really a deeper, richer in exploration of how your own unique experience in the world, your own unique heritage, your own story, maybe a particular kind of gift presented to you to be infused with your spiritual commitments in some way that you're already engaged in, and maybe in some even more beautiful and rich and explicit way. What might be the way that your own personal experience, your own story, provides this kind of original medicine and this original great teacher that the world won't know unless you get to know him, her, them. So can we create space to really invite the inner teacher to more fully arrive? And what would that look like for each of us? To deepen our ability to trust, to really sort of be in wise relationship with right where we are, and to begin to see, more clearly the buds of that inner teacher, or the, great manifestations of that inner teacher, to know where we are with some sort of humility along an arc of development. But I think it starts with just pausing and really just inviting, what do you draw on from your own story, your own lineage, your own heritage, when you think about what guides you into your practice commitments and into a sense of the particular way you might bring forth a vision for a better world? What aspects of your own experience help form the great teacher in you? It might be a particular teacher from your heritage or lineage that you just want to name and call forth, someone you knew in life, or it could be someone that is an inspirational figure from the historical period and time and place that you've borne witness to or been the beneficiary of. In the same way that I'm drawing on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, as many of you have heard me say before, probably, I was born in the last year of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life on the planet, right? I was born in 1967. By the time I turned 1 year old in 1968, he had already unfortunately been assassinated. And so, the fact that the arcs of our lives on the planet intersect has been an important, it feels important somehow for me. But I think for each of us, there may be people in the historical, cultural realm, maybe very different figures, maybe spiritual figures, maybe not, who in some sense are part of that star that guides you into a sense of your purpose, your unique moral vision, or the possibility of developing a kind of a dream of a better world. Who is that person? Who might one or two of those people be? We want to call them forth. Again, they could be in the realm of the ancestors, or they could be people that you're privileged to walk with still today. Some sound in the background. I don't know if we could mute. Thank you. William, you got muted all of a sudden.
I'm muted. I said I feel really elevated by what you've been saying, and just a memory when I was living in New York in the Bronx, and around the neighborhood, there was just so much diversity in terms of different traditions and different types of churches and all sorts, as you could imagine.
Yes.
But there was a Black gospel church, and you could feel the vibration from the singing for you could be 2 or 3 streets down the road, and you knew they would be singing, and it wasn't just the sound of the voices. There was something in that particular location that you knew something magnificent was happening and very transformative in that very space, in this Black gospel. I don't think I actually ever heard anything in my whole life like that Black gospel choir. I think I want to go back just to see if it's still there, so I can actually record it.
Yes.
You know, and I was just really seeing the fusion of what you were saying, being in your home country, and that hardcore Christian fuse with that. But it's just such a lotus flower.
Yeah.
you know,
yes,
coming out. But
thank you, my dear. I'm imagining that little gospel church. There's that location in your neighborhood, which had that energy that you're naming. I can think of such places and spaces in the neighborhoods where I've lived as well. And I want to invite, is there anybody else who's having a memory or a reflection as you think about, again, the particular places where we've lived, the particular teachers we've been privileged to meet, whether they thought of themselves as teachers or whether they just emanated something that impacted your heart and that gave you a sense of like, this is a kind of an inspiring, kind of morally clear or uplifting way or vision. What's coming up for you in terms of, it could be places, as my dear William has pointed to, teachers, maybe people in your family. Anything else? Anybody want to share?
I'd like to share. Imani here. Hi, greetings. What comes to me as you were sharing, and also Will, is my mother and my grandmother looking at Dominica in the Caribbean, where I was born, and country life, you know, and you can smell the earth and that heat, and the capacity for love and loving that they both demonstrate. I mean, my grandmother's gone now, in this plane anyway, and my mother's still alive, but her capacity to be a loving being has always been a real inspiration to me. And more recently, as an Osirian, following the teachings of a great sage, Ra'u, I see those qualities around how do you truly bring people together? How do you truly bring people to heal? It's through love. And so, yeah, these are inspiration in terms of how I strive to live my life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor, again, of these memories. They're sacred. They are sacred. We are, in these moments, sort of opening the door to recognizing this, the fact that we've walked journeys that in many ways, obvious and non-obvious, placed us in relationship to the sacred. Maybe in certain ways, every day is a moment, is an opportunity to kind of become aware of the presence of the sacred. But certainly when we talk about those who've taught us something that's still in our hearts and as an inspiration, as a lodestar, if you will, around. I love what you were saying, Imani, there, the capacity to love, how to bring people together. And I loved also that you mentioned, country life, the smell of the earth, right? Because reconnecting with a sense of ourselves as part of the natural world, I think, is really a really important aspect of this. So my dear William is suggesting this might be a good time for a breakout, smaller group conversation where we can hear from each other a little bit more and then share out what is coming for you. But before we go into it, just a few words from a reflection on Dr. Martin Luther King's Tough Mind and Tender Heart, because basically we're looking at what we want to do is what we want to explore perhaps a little bit in these breakout groups. And as we sit together today in the remaining time we have, what do we know? What do we carry in our bones about how to, what the Buddha called it was, the middle way between the extremes that tempt us into polarization, into despair. Maybe I'm the only one who feels like we're in the middle of times where we're constantly being pulled in the direction, right? We're in the middle of a war right now. Another war. Let's just say another war. Many wars that are ongoing, and they don't all get the same kind of attention, as we know. But what has happened in the Middle East just recently at the intersection between Israel and Gaza or Gaza has, concentrated many of our minds, certainly here in the US, on, the precarity of whatever sense of stability and peace we might imagine is present. How precarious that really is. Again, many of us have been living with precarity a lot for maybe all our lives. And so we know something about this. Many of us have lived through wars or come through into this conversation as the recent descendants of those who survived the war. So, what we're going through is not new, sadly, in a certain sense. These kinds of outbreaks of violence are unfortunately a feature of human life together on the planet. So the question is, how do we live with a hope, I don't know if hope is the right word. Dr. Bayo Kamalafi, with whom many of us are familiar these days, has been teaching about the wisdom of pausing and recognizing that to hope, maybe even to dream, might not be the right move in a given moment. We might just need to bear witness to the breakdown and really allow the cracks, as he calls it, to come through and see what we can learn through the cracks before we try to imagine a new world. So that might be also part of what you want, what is coming up for you. So part of what you might see is some vision or image, someone in your heritage that taught you something about witnessing the cracks, witnessing breakdown, and staring it head on, not being afraid to acknowledge that that's what we're seeing. But I feel like even as we look into those cracks, maybe this is the mama in me, although I've never had a child of my own. I just feel like we're all here to mother everybody on a certain level, because the wounded child is in all of us, and the wounded child is just, running around looking for attention all the time. But there's some mama quality in me that's like, I'm going to look at the world falling apart and acknowledge that, and maybe, recognize that might be due in this part of forever that we're living in. In this moment, we might be due for some radical breakdown and, you know, beginning again. But the mom in me is like, can we bring some love to this? Because there's children here that I don't want to suffer 1 minute more than they have to in the midst of this. Babies being born this week, that I feel a responsibility, a pre-sponsibility. I use that word to sort of refer to this idea that a responsibility that I'm born to because I got the gift of life that I didn't ask for. I feel a certain kind of responsibility to find a way to help those babies see some reason to live, to take that next breath. So even while I understand that hope can be a trap and dreaming can be a trap, I'm thinking of the babies. And I'm thinking of the children and all of us that need a reason to keep going sometimes, right? And to feel that we can. So yes, let's to say a little bit about what Dr. Martin Luther King talked about in this particular sermon. He pointed to a quote from Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Be wise and harmless at once. To me, that is very resonant with the basic ethical foundation of Buddhism, right? I think that the key first precept is you first do no harm, right? My translation, right? Do no harm as best we can. The Buddha was saying, I'm teaching about two things, suffering and the end of suffering. I want to become an expert in what causes my own suffering so I can help others see what causes theirs and what causes suffering in the world, the internal and the external dimensions of mindfulness, if you will. And then I want to be an expert in what releases us from suffering. So let's, as we think about that effort to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, think about, pardon me, not now. Really think about how it is that we know something from the teachers in our midst about both of cultivating that tough mind, that wisdom, that ability to look into the eyes of something very difficult and have that steadfastness. You're not going to turn away. We're going to be able to speak the truth about this thing. But what have we learned about how to do that, how to navigate in this sort of middle way without getting lost in despair, without stretching beyond what we can do? With equanimity is the word that Buddhists use. The middle way. What have we learned about moving through a difficult world through these teachers that inspire us? How do we keep our hearts supple as we do the hard work of imagining? Well, the work is the work, but first we do some work to imagine it. How do we keep our hearts supple to help us imagine a new way forward? All right, I'd love it if we could break out into groups to discuss this just a little bit. Maybe, could we do 15 minutes in our groups and then come back? And maybe groups, yeah, I'll leave it to our good tech support to put us in the groups that might best serve given the group that we have. Thank you all so much. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Okay, so we are back from our breakout rooms and over to Rhonda.
Well, I had just had a delightful conversation in breakout, and wanted to see what it was like for you all. What are some of the things that are live? What's alive? What are you seeing right now as we pause and reflect on the themes of what I was sharing before? What came up for you? Did you see did any stories come up? Any remembrances of teachers? Anybody want to raise a hand and share what came up for you in the breakout?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go on.
So Francine and then Zindika.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I saw you hold up your book, so I quickly Googled it and was interested in the title, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. Because like Imani will know, that's what I deal in every day of my life. And yeah, and we in our group we were talking about, well, for me it's about how to build up our resilience, and that's one of the reasons why I thought I would do this retreat, is because I feel like I need something to ground me for this continuous battle that I'm always either having myself or supporting other people who are having that battle. And it is tiring and energy sapping. So, I'm trying to find a way of finding some coping strategies so that it doesn't make me ill. and the other people in the group were sharing their experiences of things that are going on in the world and around us that makes us tired.
I hear you, my dear Francine. Thank you so very much for sharing that. I hear you and I see you. We're all, how many of you heard something resonant there? Some things going on in the world that make us absolutely exhausted and threaten real heartbreak and despair sometimes. Yeah, I mean, some of us really, really struggle with being able to kind of keep going, because you look around and you can see a lot of signs of, backwards progress, going backwards. Many of us see losing ground. So thank you so much, my dear Francine, for just saying that. We are here partly just to build up our resilience, just to give ourselves some space to heal. And I'm wondering, Francine, if the particular piece about thinking about your own journey so far and any, points of light, if you will, or teachers or any aspect there.
You talked about William talked about this church that when he was in the Bronx. He needs to come to my church every Sunday. I'm telling you. You can hear you're walking up the road to the church and you can hear the singing, and people are singing and clapping and dancing in the aisles, and the elders, they're in their 80s and their 90s, and they're just inspiring, and that's my medicine every weekend. Top myself up.
Yeah.
And I even got baptized a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. That's so beautiful.
Cool.
Where are you, Francine?
In Ipswich, in Suffolk.
Okay, beautiful. Thank y'all. So yeah, when we share, let's remind everyone where everybody's joining from. I love that. I love hearing about that church. By the way, how many of you know the song "This Little Light of Mine"? Right? One of the early sort of spirituals that certainly became a kind of a freedom song. It was actively set, it was something that those who were marching for freedom or fighting for freedom during the civil rights era would sing, just to kind of get things. I mean, well, what does it do when we pause and sing together is a question. In fact, researchers are going to be looking more and more at that in the United States over the next few years. The well-being research monies are starting to realize that singing and music, the things that our ancestors chanting, the things that our ancestors knew forever and probably knew, research shows probably we were singing and making music before we were actually forming words as human beings, 40, 50,000 years ago, before there recorded evidence of writing. There's evidence of musical instruments found around circles, around campfire. So in a way, kind of what we do when we come together and we sing is a connection to ancient traditions for figuring out how to make a way out of no way. So I hate to do this to y'all, but do you imagine we could sing a little tiny bit of "This Little Light of Mine" here together? All right. Okay, let's do it. One little light of mine.
I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little
This
light
little
of
light of mine,
mine,
I'm gonna let it
Let it
shine.
shine,
Let it
let it
shine, let it
shine,
shine,
let
let
it
it
shine,
shine.
let it shine.
let it
This little heart of mine, I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
let
let
it
it
shine.
I'm
shine.
gonna
Should
let it
I, Rhonda, should I find a record?
Shine.
this
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna let it shine. I'm
I'm
gonna let it
gonna
shine.
let it
Gonna let it
shine. This
This
little
little
light of
light of mine.
mine.
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
let
let
it
it
shine.
shine.
Let
Let
it
it
shine.
shine. Let
Let
it
it
shine.
shine.
Let
Let
it
it
shine.
shine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We've got to remember, even as simple as something as simple as that song, right? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, right? Everywhere I go, I'm going to let it shine, right? The words are so simple, but it's the singing together. It's the clapping, it's singing is an aerobic exercise actually. And no matter how, and certainly if we get into it and vigorously move as my elders did in the church, right? and certainly if we allow in some rhythm section as my church would, there was
Same.
drums,
Same.
right? Yeah, drums and some guitars licks in there.
Mm-hmm.
But just to move together and allow the sort of the echoing of our heartbeats to surround us in that beat of that music and the claps, and many of us remember sitting on our mothers or grandmothers or uncles or somebody's lap during some sermon somewhere. In the church that I grew up in, we would hold hands and greet each other in the before the sermon, after the sermon, right? There was a real sense of community in those spaces. And so we're reconnecting in some ways to the power of connection. And this part of our talk is really inviting us to remember the different things that we may have encountered along the way, the different traditions that we may have encountered along the way that helped us know something about how to, strengthen ourselves for the difficult floodwaters, as the Buddha talked about, navigating the floods. How do we do it? The middle way, not getting stuck in despair, not stretching too far beyond what we know how to do, but like finding a way, as King was suggesting, to keep our hearts open. Yeah, I see Imani. The Hidden Messages in Water is an amazing book speaking about how crystals in waters are perfectly formed, right? When we sing loving, uplifting songs or utter words of love and care, crystals were distorted or they were unformed when words of hate were placed in water. Y'all, sound and the sound of our voices, we could go on and on and on about the power of them. But I want to bring, is it Zindika? Someone else had their hand up next. Was it, do I have that right?
Zindika.
Okay, great. Make sure you're unmuted, my dear.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, of course. Yeah. Thanks for that, because that singing, I do some like a little bit of, sound healing, and one of the songs that came to me, and I say almost came to me after meditation, like from the ancestors, was that song of This Little Light of Mine, and that's very important that we remember that we've all got that light. It may be covered over, we may not recognize it, but that is there, and that is for us to actually begin to bring that light out and let it shine. And our folks who depended on music, they depended on dance, in order to be able to express themselves, and so there was no other way they could express themselves, because if they'd expressed themselves in any other way, their lives would have been in danger. So, music and dance was the way in which that expression came out. And that expression was so important as well, because it was a release, because you can imagine what people who are subjugated and oppressed, what they're coping with, have to keep inside. So how else could they release it? So that is so crucial to us, and that we mustn't forget that. And so when I sort of got this idea and this came to me with sound healing, I thought, yes. And it also brought me back to my childhood and listening to women when they were hard at work, you know, humming those religious songs, you know, that they heard in church. And as a child, you probably grew up on I did, your mother's lap or your auntie's lap or your grandma's lap. And all you could hear was these songs. You know, so that's what came to me. And you know how restful that sound is. That's because that's what you grew up hearing when you were a child. You know, it made you feel, oh my goodness, I feel so at home. Yeah, I can just go to sleep now, or I can just release all of that burden, that stress, whatever it is, especially the stress you carry home from work and from the outside, you know. And you know, even the stress now, we're talking about war in different parts of the world, and that is stress as well. And you know, those are ways you have to begin to release it. And I think, just to go back to what I was going to say initially about our group as we got together, was the fact that the people that came up in our group were, of course, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Marcus Garvey. And what great visionary and leaders they were. And that the reason that they had that ability was because they had a deep peace. So we were saying that's so important to have that deep peace within. And as we're talking about mindfulness, meditation, and that's one of the ways you can build that deep peace within and connect. And they had that inner connection. And I think that's what enables people like that to be able to do that type of work and to become leaders, you know, the great leaders that they are, and to be able to face their foe and people who are against them, and to face them, you know, with such bravery. And that is so important. And so those people came up and they definitely influenced me as I was growing up, you know. I used to watch all those civil rights documentary, and I used to just admire, you know, the people who stood against water cannons and bullets and huge police officers coming with guns. And, you know, I think, wow, you know, as a child, I used to look at that, I think, yeah, you know, those people are very brave. And of course, the same for Nelson Mandela. And I was saying as well in the group that one of the things I learned from my, you know, my small Caribbean home island was we were people who our eyes hadn't been open until somebody like Marcus Garvey came along and started to educate people. And he could only have got that from his own deep peace and from his own deep vision to be able to bring that forward to the rest of us and enlighten us and open our eyes. So I'm always grateful for those people, because if they hadn't done what they've done, my eyes wouldn't be open. I wouldn't have a clue who I was. I'd still be lost. So yeah, so that's what came out anyway from our talk in the breakout room.
Wow. Thank you so much, Zindika, for sharing from your own experience. I love the humming, right? You know, just allowing sound to support us. And sometimes seeing the relationship between allowing a sound, a song, praise and worship, some dance, some now it's going to shift right into R&B, rock and roll, rap, right? Some movement. But allowing some of that energy and expression of that to help settle us so that we can be regulated enough, connected enough, feeling alive enough, perhaps to pause, to sit. You know, for some of us, I feel like I talked about it last year, although I may not have, but I often will do a bit of movement practice before sitting on a meditation mat. You know, just a little bit of qigong or yoga, so that, you know, the sort of energy that is in me can begin to kind of prepare itself, get a little bit of outward expression, so that then I can sort of sit and rest. Now, I'm not, prescribing this for anyone, but maybe if for those of us who sometimes feel a little antsy when we sit down to meditate at the beginning, for me, when I don't run as much as I used to now, but certainly when I used to run, I would, actually plan to sort of do a short run as a prelude to a meditation. Now I do a walk, either as a prelude to a meditation or as a practice of meditation. I don't wear my headphones and listen to music unless, again, I want to do a special kind of meditative music thing. But mostly I don't listen to music. I call it a walk to self practice. And it is a way of like me moving through and remembering feet on this ground, on this earth, feeling the breath coming in, noticing the changes of seasons, smelling, the scent of the fog coming in here in San Francisco, and the way on a warm day we can smell more of the flowers, the cool day we can just feel the mist. So just allowing the walk to itself be a kind of a grounding practice, but also then if I have the time to allow it to be a prelude to a sit. And similarly, song for me, singing and moving the body, all of these are different ways that we might experiment with supporting ourselves in preparation for a kind of a practice that is aimed at settling us and opening up the space to what I think you were referring to in a way, Zindika, when talking about having that inner peace, that inner clarity as a ground for being able to write about how we can balance a tough mind with a tender heart. For example, in Martin Luther King's teaching, or Ubuntu as a way of being in Mandela and Bishop Desmond Tutu's teachings, right? So there are different ways that we might, in all of our heritages, lean into those teachers and experiment with different practices that support us in cultivating, a way of being that apprehends the importance of still mind and how to cultivate that. And, there are different ways to cultivate it. Meditation is only one. It may not work for everybody. But if we struggle with meditation, sometimes adding a little bit of a prelude of movement, a prelude of prayer, a prelude of a song, of journaling, just to sort of kind of help get some of the, what I call sometimes the jangly energy to calm itself. Because if you just try to sit down on a cushion sometimes, it can just be like, this is not happening. I might have to rock on that cushion. I might have to actually lie down sometimes for me. Like I'm trying to sit. It's like, no, today is a lie down meditation day because there's no way you can sit right now. Or today is just a walk because I cannot sit with what's going on. Connect with somebody. Call somebody. Let that be the meditation practice. Connect with a human being practice. So just allow yourself some experimentation. I thank you so much, Zindika, for just what you shared, the humming and the remembering that a lot of the wisdom for moving through the world has been cultivated in a way that helped support knowing that we do have some capacity for peace inside. We have it inside. We just need to give ourselves time and support. In our breakout group, we talked about how the institutional spaces we find ourselves in, universities, schools, workplaces, they're often not aiming at helping you cultivate this calm inside or this sense that your heart is still able to engage with other people. In fact, we get trained out of being caring individuals. We get trained into competition, trained into like, there's not enough. I got to get mine, you got to get yours. You're going to be measured by some short-term thing, not by how you show up. So we're in a way unlearning some of those bad trainings, frankly, when we pause, when we allow our hearts to connect with each other. So I want to pause now, speaking of which, and see what other reflections came up. So if anybody else would favor us with the generosity of a share.
Yeah, I'd like to share. in our group, maybe Zindika probably covered some of this, but the essence of peace, finding peace in the middle of conflict, and that's conflict on a personal level as well as a global level. And just questions that people have asked me with regards to the wider global conflicts that we're witnessing, because many have felt guilty or they felt helpless as to what they could do to help with the situation. And I've always said, you know, in order for there to be global peace, it starts with the individual. It has to start with us first, because we can be going out on the streets and doing our protesting with our placards and everything else, but, you know, asking for peace or justice. But if there's no peace within us, there's no peace in our households. We don't even look at each other down the street. You know, we're not lending that hand of peace out to individuals. How can there be peace on a global basis? And oftentimes when we ask about peace for the world, it's from a selfish perspective, you know, because we can't handle what's going on. And I mentioned to the ladies in our group about the challenges that I'm facing personally in my neighborhood, and having to dig deep and find that level of maintaining peace in the middle of those who do not like you, you know. It takes enormous mental, emotional, physical and spiritual strength. And all I can do is just offer that up in prayer to God and say, look, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what you're doing, but help me to face this day in peace, no matter what comes my way. And oftentimes something will come that will help to sustain me. And you mentioned about humming. I practice breath work. I teach breath work as well. And one of the breath work techniques that we do is called humming bee, where you inhale and then as you exhale, you hum. And that helps to regulate the parasympathetic nervous system, mainly the vagus nerve. And that brings us into that place of balance and settleness. And it's from there that there is peace. The peace is already in us. It's just uncovering all the yucky stuff, the stress, the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that others have told us over the years, about who we are. Once that gets uncovered, then peace can arise, then calm can arise. Then we can start to transform our cultures into that calm space. But for me, it's something that's ongoing. I'm still learning. I'm at the very beginning about peace. So admiring people like Martin Luther, admiring people like Nelson Mandela, where they grew to maintain peace in the middle of tough situations is just phenomenal. So yeah, I didn't ask to be on this journey, but somehow God has put me on here. So I'm doing my best to be obedient and to maintain that level of peace.
Wow. Pausing. Thank you, my dear Lillian. Really just receiving what you're sharing. Again, thank you for the generosity of your share, and for all of you for sharing and or bearing witness to each other, the generosity of your presence. Lillian, what you say is touching to me, because you're just bringing the reality of just everydayness of the struggle. If we are in a neighborhood where we're up against knowing there's a negative energy and maybe a threat right there in our neighborhood, that's, again, an experience, a situation that is, maybe becoming more common. Certainly more people are experiencing this sort of dynamic than we like to think. And it's real. The way that a negative sort of energy like that in your neighborhood can impact you is real. I remember living in a neighborhood as a young married woman some years ago. And I remember we bought a puppy, my partner and I. And, we're just getting used to this puppy and having a dog. And we also worked away from the home every day. So we put the puppy outside because, puppy in the house while you're gone. We put him in the backyard. And after maybe one day of this, maybe the end of the first day, certainly the end of the second day, we got an anonymous note that was kind of hate-filled, that was around, someone who lived in the neighborhood. And it was anonymous, which is interesting, right? Someone living in the neighborhood who worked from home, who just was like absolutely beside themselves with anger that we could have left a puppy barking outside. And what chilled us about it was, the person didn't do us the respect of coming to the door and saying, oh, I happen to be working, right? We didn't know. We didn't know who they were, where they were. We didn't know their circumstance. And we certainly didn't put a dog outside to antagonize them, right? We were just trying to do right by this little guy. But it was such a sort of shocking reminder of, again, the precariousness of these communities where we don't know our neighbors as well as maybe we used to. He and I just moved to this area, and it could have become violent. Then we immediately, because there was threats. Certainly after the second day, we got a more threatening letter. While we're trying to figure this out, what do we do? Who is this person? More threatening letter. So we immediately shifted into, well, we just have to find a way. And we certainly took the dog out of the yard. And then we, still, I think we were struggling to find ways to keep whatever noise that was coming out of our house down. But that's just the one example I have of and felt like all the tension of what it feels like to have that kind of, threatening behavior coming out of nowhere, but where people know where you live. And basically we're saying, the second letter was like, we'll kill this dog if you don't figure out a way to keep it quiet, because we're working from home. So this was 20 years ago. People are so dysregulated these days. And in the US, there's so much access to lethal weaponry that neighbor violence is a scary thing, or neighbor threat is a scary thing. And there's so many ways getting involved politically, taking a stand against, in this moment, around the war, any position, no matter what you say around this war, depending on where you are, especially again in the United States, it's fraught. I was at a conference on spirituality this weekend, presenting, and at that conference, which had the theme, Sacred Hearts, Sacred Minds, Embodying Love. Right, this is the theme. It was a festival of interfaith peace. And I'm on stage with a Jewish rabbi and an indigenous scholar and teacher. And the indigenous scholar got up and just said, I must speak against this war. I must speak on behalf of protecting the children. Described it as a kind of a colonial kind of power situation of disproportionate power that spoke to her of what happened to the indigenous people in the United States who met a power that suddenly wanted to clear the land. Well, this rabbi, who had just minutes before been talking about how we need to love the stranger, in general, and how we need to cultivate compassion in general, when he heard this other speaker describe the war as being in parallel with what happened to the native people in the U.S. in the period of what some of us called the cleansing, the genocide of the native people in the U.S. Not that, and we know that the communities are still, the genocide didn't fully take. We still have Native Americans and indigenous Americans and American Indians here. But it was a terror, a period of the terror, generations of terror, with children being taken out of their homes, and talk about hostages being taken, kidnapped and taken forever. And so she stood to say, you know what, we understand pain, we understand, wanting to respond with self-defensive tactics, but this feels like genocidal campaign similar to what happened. Woo, those are the words that triggered. So this young, beautiful rabbi responded with, I must speak, I am hurt, and got into this tension that we know is in the world, erupted on our stage. I'm sitting here, there they are. I've said a few words about remembering that we're all one, remembering how to practice to remember, how to open our hearts, and boom, 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 right? So in everyday life right now, we are all feeling the minefields around us, where any one of us could find ourselves either feeling triggered and all of the rush of the threat sensors, right? The things that happen to us when we feel that we're not safe, or saying something, and these are dynamics that go together, saying something or doing something that we don't intend to cause harm, that somebody perceives as harmful, and then it's off and running. So it's real what we're talking about. So we do need practices to support us in cultivating the ability to sort of resource ourselves. And the more we practice, I think, in a consistent way, the better able we are to bring a sense of the eye in the storm to those moments when out of nowhere we find ourselves at threat, or having triggered somebody to come at us without trying, or feeling triggered, feeling no longer safe because of something that's just erupted in our midst. That's the kind of world we're living in right now. And of course, people are becoming victims of violence. So it's not just threat, and we know that. And that, adds an edge to it, because again, there's much more weaponry available in many places than there used to be. So Martin Luther King Jr. was talking in the last century, but he had a certain, nevertheless, I think, to grow up as a Black American in the last century was to also know something about the ever-present threat of violence and death. That's how white supremacy has always been maintained, actually, and certainly has been maintained in the U.S. The threat of death. So that's what people were escaping from in the South. I've heard people walk up to me, elders in San Francisco, and say, I left the South because as a young boy, I couldn't walk on the sidewalk with white people without being threatened with death. So that is in the lifetime of people who walk on the sidewalks of San Francisco right now, to know what it's like to be that targeted based on identity in this country. And it still exists for people who look different in any way, out of place in any way, in any neighborhood in the United States today and in different parts of the world. Out of place. Because we have racialized space, we have gendered space, we have heteronormed space, so that if you're queer in certain communities, you're vulnerable to be targeted. We know these things. And so when I talk about this work, I bring a certain fierce love, but don't miss the fierce part. It's not because I don't see an everyday, walk with clarity about the risks that we face. and with heartbreak and grief about the actuality on the other side of those risks for many people, for too many people. And King did not, again, he's writing this, nevertheless, he's the same kind of fierce love, right? The same kind of I'm sorry to use the word bullshit, but no bullshit love, where he's just like, in the face of all of this, we must bring together tough-mindedness and tender-heartedness if we are to move creatively toward a goal of freedom and justice. We must actively engage in resistance to injustice, but we have to do so nonviolently. That was his particular take. And, as much as I might like to say there might be some better way, I haven't really found it yet. I don't believe there's a way toward the world the moral imagination that I bring. It's very clear that we got to minimize the ever-present threat of becoming oppressors, because that's all we've seen. Of doing violence because we've been victims of violence. And then creating a world in which, that's what everybody that's what the children have been taught. Hello, cycles of violence for generations and generations and generations. It must stop somewhere. I'm not saying that we're all ready to be those who stop it. I will tell you, as I reported in this little essay that I published, I have students every day who come up to me and ask me questions like this. Well, is it now the time to hate? Because I see a lot of hate. And literally in my mindfulness, my contemplative lawyering class, I have students that are like, when will be the time for us to act from hate? Because we've been meditating and cultivating compassion, but we see a lot of hate out there, and they feel a little bit reactive to this idea that we always have to be cultivating peace and resistance to that. Here was another question. Is it possible that violence in service of justice is in a way the other side of nonviolence? Because another thing that I talk about a lot is bringing together both and. That the whole, we got to be able to deal with the whole shape of the cloth. Because that is a kind of a teaching of Buddhism. A lot of the wisdom practices are about integrating a sense of the whole. Shadow and light is what I talk about in my soulfulness classes and my soul-heartedness classes that I'm cultivating and writing about. Really being able to work with both shadow and light, the whole, so that we can be Baba Kandimwa taught or teaches, be like the river that refuses no ocean. Be like that river that refuses no ocean. That means, hate sometimes shows up. And we don't want to be the ones running out of the room. We're not running toward a bayonet, right? We're not running toward the bombs if we can avoid it. But we're not putting our heads down in the sand, unwilling to see what needs to be met with that moral imagination that we talked about bringing forth in our own unique ways. We are the ones who are cultivating the capacity to take care of ourselves, bring love to ourselves, ease and gentle ourselves, give ourselves a break when we need it. But we do this not only for ourselves. That's what King was talking about. So because that tender-heartedness is not just for the other. Can I say that again? The tender-heartedness, I would say, isn't even mostly for the other. To me, this is the most important justification for nonviolence, because it starts within our hearts, and it is everything that manifests in the world starts within first. I don't believe you can do violence to other people if you haven't somehow become a little bit of an expert at doing some kind of violence to yourself. Cutting off the tender parts of yourself, the loving the parts of yourself, including the part that really doesn't know and still learning and growing, the part that's internalized methods that have been efficient in maintaining systems of hierarchy for generations and generations and generations. We've all inherited these methods. We've all been trained. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't. So being able to see more clearly how we've been sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, trained in the means and methods of oppression, all of us. And then cultivating a capacity to see that more clearly and invite your inner wisdom teacher, the guides that inspire you, and your original medicine, that wisdom teaching that hasn't been delivered yet because it's just forming in you. Inviting that teaching to help disrupt the patterns we've all inherited of a lack of self-care, violence towards some part of the self. I've shared with y'all, I think, in prior retreats, I never know before for sure, but always I come and I'm like, I believe I've told this group this before, that one of the ways I imbibed a lack of self-care for myself as a child growing up with parents who had struggled under oppression in the United States, impoverished, fighting poverty, by which I mean not having enough food. I grew up without having enough food often. But I also had a stepfather who would then lock up the food that we had sometimes. So domestic violence too. Lots of different patterns like that. And yet coming to a place where we realize that we've seen all those things, but we want to choose to be different in this life, this one precious life that we have. We don't know how long we have. The climate is trying to tell us in very many ways, don't assume you have forever. Get it right? So bringing that loving quality of healing to ourselves, but then looking around and seeing, what if this is my last day? I honestly have that as a practice every day. The practice of remembering that time is short is again a traditional Buddhist practice, cultivating awareness of death as an inspiration for living well, like living fully. And to me, a love that is new in nature is the invitation that my own kind of spiritual teachings seem to be delivering us to. I think in a certain sense, that is what gospel music is trying to tell us. And in fact, W.E.B. Du Bois, towering intellectual of the 20th century, many of you know, African-American scholar, teacher, one of his teachings was that the Black spiritual tradition was going to save the world. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. But he really believed that there was so much power in the Black spiritual tradition that we have been pointing to in this call, and we've experienced in this call, even with this little light of mine. Du Bois believed that probably would be the legacy, might just be the thing that the world would come to know Black genius through. So sometimes it can sound a little bit, I don't know, maybe not edgy enough to say that what we're actually trying to do is really cultivate the ability to keep going with a loving heart, with a growing sense of possibility that constant change always avails. There's a sense of possibility that being constantly in change, right, avails. Like things are changing. That can be scary for some people, but there's always possibility, right? There's always, we don't know what's going to happen the next minute, really. We can forecast the worst. What if we start forecasting the best? I think pausing to imagine what the best looks like from your own original point of view that we've never heard from, we have never seen it, is part of what we can do with our practices. Allow the time that we practice to bring us back in touch with our unique moral genius, that part of us that has something to say about how we can live more decently, lovingly, compassionately together, despite having a clear sense of what is wrong and what needs to be improved, and a kind of a strategy for doing some of that. That includes just caring for ourselves a little bit better. It really has sees a radical connection between caring for ourselves better, and making the world better. And I know you all see this, or else you wouldn't be here. So I need to pause now and invite us, maybe if there's a word or two of reflection, maybe a question, we can either bring it to the live, raise your hand and share it, or maybe put a word or two in the chat. Because I know we need to begin to close very soon. My dear Zenubia.
Yeah, there's just going back to the, I mean, thank you for sharing what you have shared. It's like a spiritual jam. Jamming session. Yeah, I like that. And there's so much in that. Just harking back to some of the themes that came up was this sense that just like that river, we are made up of these many streams. And there is something that is our original and unique contribution. And one of the, I think perhaps an essential way of being able to, first of all, see and then begin to work with that essential nature of ours is the observer. When we're talking about Nelson Mandela and the great ones and that sense of peace, it's because they were not submerged in their identity. If we are submerged in identity, we cannot see the bigger picture. But to be able to stand to one side and go, but that's not me. This is just a part of me. And who I'm dealing with, that's just a part of them. It becomes a space where you start to not get locked down in it. That's kind of where I'm, seeing things. And I just want to share that.
I see you and join with you in that breath of vision, right? The view, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism anyway, starts with right view. And, there are different ways of interpreting what that means, but certainly for me it means seeing through some of the ways we get caught in a small sense of self and remembering some mystery created everything within our ability to see, hear, sense, taste, touch, smell, and that includes us. Some mystery. So whenever we're tempted to only think of ourselves through our deprivation story, our wound story, even while we know that story exists and is real on a certain level, my goodness, it's not the whole story. It's never the whole story. So thank you, my dear Zenuvia, for just reminding. This practice really, I think, is about opening up the aperture so that we remember always that right now we're on a planet that we didn't create, already in the heavens, that is in the middle of forever. And where are we in the relative scheme of even human history? We actually don't know. And what will come, we have no idea. But what we can ask is, in this moment, in this limited time, how do I want to live? And that might be in collaboration with the highest and best that we might achieve. Because there's some of that humming through the universe. I want to jam with that. Thank you, my dear. Maybe one more reflection. Some of you, we haven't heard from everyone, but it'd be great to hear from some voice we haven't heard from.
Well, they can type it. Well,
Or you can type, yeah. Kathy May, Priscilla, Ranju. I'm bad at trying to call on people like a law professor. Keita. Anybody who feels called, this is for you.
I will happily come in and take some space. Thank you for the call, Rhonda. I'm so moved by what you are saying, Zenubia, and how easily we get caught up in the little versions of ourselves, and how these times that call on us to expand the heart, it's often the very harsh times, the particularly harsh times through which our hearts we're able to cultivate more heart. And I've always found that such a almost a contradiction, because of course all the triggers are so present, and it's very easy to succumb to the limited notions and versions of ourselves. And in some respects, sometimes that is helpful in terms of community and being together and being able to hold one another. But that larger than personality, that bigger than identity, is always taking us higher, is always taking us higher. And it seems as if we are offered the opportunity again and again, and increasingly so, with the world as it is at the moment. So I'm just really grateful, Rhonda, for this evening's session, and feeling so very blessed at the many, many teachers who come in so many shapes and sizes, all of whom encourage this cultivation of heart and of this power of love as justice. So I simply am very thankful. Thank you so much. I love the feeling of gratitude, and I have it in abundance this evening. Thank you so much.
Taking that in, all of what you just shared, that amplification of that bigger view, and that naming of the contradiction that is in these crucibles, where we really feel a justifiable call toward focusing and narrowing our vision and view, and knowing who the enemy is and arming up. It's in these moments that we're really invited to actually say, I see that, I understand how that happens, the causes and conditions of that arising. But I can step into a different water right here. I can come into the river differently and join with this and see who we really are together and help bring that energy to this. Not easy, but we're born for this. We're born for not easy, and that kind of not easy that has a hidden sort of secret doorway into gratitude, joy, love, power, that you're just speaking to so beautifully, my dear Kathy May. I need to turn this over to my dear William as we close tonight's session. I could offer a few words of meditation or allow William to guide. My dear, how would you like to proceed?
You do it. You please please continue.
Yeah, okay, good. Every beautiful, dear, and just outrageously gorgeous spirit that's right here. Spirit with name and no name that's right here. And all of the generations and places, parts of the earth that we, as we move, represent in certain ways, naming and inviting a deep bow to all that is here. All that has arisen in our time together, all that was just waiting to be invited in, and we're just, in some ways, over the last couple of hours, have just been opening a little bit more of a door. Some teaching that wanted to come up in your life, some memory, some teacher. So a deep bow of welcome to all that you are. And inviting, grounding in the sense of the resources that are available to each of us as we breathe in and out. As we feel the connection between the body and the earth in this moment. And just remember that in this moment and in every moment that we live, this earth is a shared home. We're never alone. We were never alone. This group was never unformed. We have always been in a network, and we're just becoming revealed to each other today. So as we breathe in and out, feeling the support that exists right where you are, breath, chair, light, room that's safe enough, community that's safe enough, but also just this broad network as a structure of support for you that has always been and will be in ways that will be known and not known through time. So I just want to thank every single one of you, and especially take a deep extra bow to your practice and the commitments you make to a regular practice. The vow on the back of this rakasu that I wear speaks of on the great road of the Buddha's ancestors, there is a way unsurpassable of practice, continuous and sustained. It's not by accident that our great teachers had that inner source of peace. So by practicing, let's tap into our inner peace to support us in moving through the world at this time. Thank you, beautiful beings on the Great Way. With much love to you. Seeing all of your power and reflecting that. Yeah, thank you, beautiful beings.
Can you unmute, please, and just give Rhonda some noise? Here,
Blessed to have you on this evening.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Very welcome.
And see everyone
See you
for
tomorrow.
our
Bye.
night
Yeah.
with Aryavanchin Dharma active the 21st century. And the evening, Sharon Brown, Discovering Inner Self, the Key to Community Connection at 6 p.m. tomorrow. So get a good rest. Stay mindful. Good night.